Welcome to the Theology for the Church podcast. Today I'm joined by Dr. Jordan Steffaniak to talk about his new book on moral apologetics. Brother, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining me for this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, man. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's been a little bit. We had a conversation a couple years ago, so maybe just give us a update on life and ministry and those type of things for you.
Sure. So I help lead a nonprofit called the London Lyceum, which also has a publishing house called Hanover Press. So we publish a lot of original academic theology and philosophy, as well as we have a peer-reviewed journal called the Hanover Review that comes out typically twice a year, as long as we have enough manpower to make it happen.
Sure.
It's 100% volunteer organization, so all of us, we're just kind of like laboring alongside each other to hopefully serve the broader church. And we've got a lot of resources out there, whether it's sort of short form stuff on the website or podcasts or different things like that. Besides that, I am a licensed loan originator and own my own mortgage brokerage, so I help people buy homes and leverage their homes for whatever they need to do. If they need to help their kids with college, which is ridiculously expensive, or if they've got other they need to do something to the house, HVAC goes out and you've got to pay for that somehow. I can help them make sure that they don't break the bank and can have that taken care of so they have AC or whatever it may be. So that's a lot of fun. They're very different, but in a lot of ways, you're just helping people with having conversations, and you'd be surprised. I mean, the amount of conversations I have with people on that side of things that are completely unexpected. People just start sharing their lives with me, and I'm like, wow, okay, well, this is an opportunity to really shepherd you and help you think through these topics, and you probably would have never told anybody about, how your mom died or how this happened, and this led you to this and that and the other thing, and so it's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that, and maybe to kind of get us into our conversation here, I think when most people, that listen to this podcast, been in the church a little bit, when they hear apologetics, they kind of have a basic understanding, like, okay, it's, defense for the Christian faith, right? But what maybe are we talking about as we start to move toward the realm, more specifically, of moral apologetics in particular?
Yeah, I mean, growing up for me, apologetics was pretty much just creation versus evolution debates. In my youth group, we'd have somebody come and tell us why all the dinosaur bones are actually only 6,000 years old, and how all of the timeline makes sense. And that was all apologetics was like cracked up to be. That's how you defended the faith. And in a large measure, there is an element that you want to defend basic claims of the Bible, and you want to claim. A lot of the times, it was just over the last, 30 to 40 to 50 years, just saying, here's some reasons God exists. And we have good reasons to think that. And that is a form of apologetics. We want to defend the fact that God exists, defend different aspects of the Bible. But when it comes to moral apologetics in particular, the way that is sort of constructed is defending certain moral claims of Christianity. So a lot of us have probably seen how Christianity is no longer the extremely dominant position, at least in the Western world. It's questioned in a lot of ways. And a lot of the reasons it's questioned is not so much because of these evidential arguments where, I don't believe these pieces of scientific data lead to God. It's more like, actually, the Christian moral claims are problematic. Yeah. And they should be rejected, and therefore Christianity should be rejected. And so what we're trying to do here in this particular book is defend certain basic moral principles that are embedded in Christianity and say, no, Christianity is true, and these sort of critiques against it on these moral grounds fall, and they don't stand up to scrutiny. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so, because they're, when you guys talk about the questions kind of shifting, it's not just a rejection of like the Christian God, but we still like the morals, right? This makes for a good culture and society. But now it's like, we don't like God, and we don't like the biblical worldview or the ethics, and we actually think those are really bad, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it used to be, it was just kind of like shared intuition, common sense, and now it's kind of like, well, I don't know, I want to reject all these sort of claims of Christianity. I don't like what they say or what they mean. I think they actually lead to bad outcomes. And so now we're trying to defend on those grounds.
Yeah. But you guys talk about how, the world, it may it may reject Christian theism, right, in favor of atheism. But I think the question that we need to ask is, can it actually ground any moral concepts without the God of the Bible? And maybe in what ways do they try to do that?
Yeah. So if you read the book, the first half is sort of like structured as sort of framework pieces. Let's get all of our pieces in line to give you the foundation to help you understand how to apply these sort of Christian claims to these specific moral problems.
Yeah.
And so one of those is dealing with this question of how do we ground moral concepts? And if you look from a non-Christian perspective, there's not really any good way to ground moral claims. It's oftentimes you're going to be borrowing either from Christianity to ground them, or you're going to ground them in sort of just these brute ad hoc ways. And now, I'm no expert in all the different things on this particular topic. Jamie's the co-author who helped me write the book. He's really good on these topics. But the basic idea is just atheists or different non-Christians will try to put together ways to say, this is why we can say that this moral claim is true. Like for example, personal experience, I took a class on Aristotle at the University of Louisville, and my teacher was very strongly into moral claims are grounded in just sort of the relative collective community's consent.
Yeah.
And it was just, as long as everybody sort of agrees with these things, that's what grounds a moral fact. Obviously, I think that's extremely problematic because that shifts so consistently. Yeah. And there are certain moral claims that intuitively everyone agrees this is wrong. And so if we all agree, even these disparate groups agree this is wrong, there's got to be something deeper that's grounding that moral claim than just simply like we all agree on this. But there's lots of atheists who try to make non-theistic arguments that will just ground it in what's called a brute fact. And that's just a fact of the universe. There's nothing deeper. It is what it is. And at least to me, I'm like, at least you're honest and open about that commitment. Yeah. I don't think that's nearly as satisfying as being able to say, well, the reason this is the case is because God is all good, all powerful, all knowing, and all these different sort of typical attributes that we would apply to God. And because of that, all these moral claims are true. To me, in a sense, that is also a claim to a brute fact because God is sort of the bottom shelf. There's nothing deeper than him. But having a personal, real God as the explanation versus just, it's the universe. Yeah. To me, there's a significant difference in those two claims. So non-Christians, that's where you really, in my opinion, that's the only route you can go that's consistent and that's not completely crazy. But it's not satisfying. I like you can do that and be consistent in my mind, but it's not satisfying in any way.
Yeah. I agree. And I think one thing, when I was first studying systematic theology a little bit more, in a formal way, I felt like a lot of the apologetic questions began to be answered. And so to me, it felt like, most of apologetics is just good systematic theology. But then you get to our day and we're talking about the moral apologetics. Like we have to take it a step further. And the question of our day really right now is anthropology, which you guys bring up, right? The doctrine of man. And, I think, and not just like origin, questions, but meaning and purpose and what do I do, right? The morality, piece to that. But before we kind of go there, I think we have to understand like what a human being is, right? To begin with. And so you guys talk about what, human nature is, what the self is, and how these concepts have actually changed throughout Western history. And so if you could give us just like the, 60,000 foot overview, what would you say?
Yeah. So like you said, anthropology really is the center issue of our day. I think all of the real questions, the real debates that are going on in our culture ultimately end up boiling down to some form of anthropology. Mm-hmm. Just an understanding of who we are as persons, what our goals are as human people, what characteristics we share across borders. So when it comes to human nature and the self, we think it's really important to sort of cash out what exactly are we talking about when we talk about human nature. Broadly speaking, there's a couple of ways to understand human nature. There's one way, which in our modern context is very common, which is ultimately to deny that any sort of human nature exists. There's no real shared element that we all have in some way.
Yeah.
Previously, for centuries, everybody agrees there's something that is human nature that all humans participate in some way. Now, how that all works out, whether that's some, abstract universal or whether we all individually just resemble each other in these ways, that's debated and cashed out differently. But there's all this agreement that this is what a human is. They have some sort of rational nature and they have particular ends and goals. They're not like a crocodile. They're not like a polar bear.
Yeah.
They're a human person. And they have certain capacities that other natural kinds don't have. And so we wanted to sort of set down what, number one, human nature exists, and it's relevant for our conversation. And if you deny human nature, you have all sorts of problems, not only from a Christian perspective, but from just a general moral framework perspective. If you get rid of human nature, you don't really have any grounds to explain why humans deserve any sort of treatment that is different than anything else, than the cockroach that you just stepped on in your house. They should have the same level of rights as you if we get rid of human nature. And so when we talk about human nature, there's a couple of ways that historically that's been sort of explained. One of them is in more of a dualist framework, a substance dualist or a Cartesian dualist. So that generally just means that in a Cartesian dualist framework, you've got two sort of substances that make up the human person. You have the body and the soul. And they are separate, unique, separable substances that can exist apart from one another. Well, the body can't exist apart ultimately from the soul, but the soul kind of exists and is by itself. And then you have sort of like this hybrid amphibian view, what would be called hylomorphism, where the body and the soul somehow are connected in such a way that they are inseparable elements of what it means to be a human person. Now, the differences between a substance dualist and a hylomorphist can get real fuzzy depending on how fine-grained you want to get. Okay, I'm critical of various substance dualist proposals, but at the end of the day, if you kind of like work together, you end up finding, we're actually really, really close in a lot of ways. And then you have, on the other end, you could still have a human nature, but it could be a materialist or physicalist sort of human nature, where you're purely material. Everything all the way down, there's no actual soul in the sense of an immaterial piece of you. It's all material. I think that's problematic from a number of ways, but just because there's a lot of facts and things that we can't ultimately describe at a physical level. And we've got to account for some sort of immaterial aspect. And if we're already committed to certain Christian claims like God and angels that we would already say are immaterial, there's no reason to recoil at the idea that there's something immaterial, because we've already sort of brought that into our worldview. We already think that immaterial things exist. So what's problematic about positing some sort of immaterial aspect of a human person? But there's also sort of like a middle way between a hylomorphist and a materialist. It's still technically categorized in that materialistic realm where you're completely physical, but at some level of complexity, things just like unlock an emergent sort of level of consciousness or the soul. And it truly is immaterial, or it could still be material, but it's distinct in some unique, special way. And it emerges. And you see all sorts of properties like this across the physical universe, where two physical things have a specific set of properties. When you bring them together, suddenly there's this new thing that didn't exist before. I think those have a little bit more legs to stand on than does the pure materialist. Now, I think you should go hylomorphist, and that's what we argue in this book, and I think it helps you solve a lot of moral problems. Now, we'll talk about other stuff, I'm sure, at some point. I'm droning on a little bit. I do want to give the caveat, you don't have to be a hylomorphist to be a Christian or to defend the Christian faith. We just think that it makes a lot more sense and it helps you have more ammunition to defend certain moral claims.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And so if you have kind of the human nature, like this is what like a human is, how would you define the self, and why is it important to talk about both things?
Yeah. So the self in our modern context is a completely malleable, confusing word. It could mean anything from just my inner feelings and emotions to my personal identity as an individual person, like I am this self, my son is that self. When we use the word self, we're really using it interchangeably with just a person, an individual person that exists. And we're not boiling it down to some sort of consciousness or just inner feelings or something like that. In those senses, the self is not usually a helpful term, just because it's confusing and it doesn't really get at anything. But since it's ubiquitous, we just kind of say like, okay, we'll use it, but let's be clear about how we're using it. It's just a person. An individual person exists. That's who it is. And when it comes to human nature, how do we describe what a human is? Well, they're a rational animal. I tend to just go with sort of the Aristotelian definition that gets picked up in the Christian tradition, and pretty much that's agreed upon. Humans are rational animals. They have this innate capacity that's God-given to be able to have an intellect and a will. So a rational animal doesn't mean that you are somehow only human if you can reason at a certain level. It doesn't mean that you're only human if you have the ability even to do it. So there's a lot of people who look at something like defining a human person as a rational animal as problematic because, well, look at the mentally handicapped, look at children, look at what happens when you're asleep. You can't do all these things. Like, that's not what we're talking about. It's not exercising this capacity. It's just innately having the capacity itself, which is intrinsic to what the soul is. And so if you have a soul, if you're a human person, you ultimately have that capacity. Now, it can be blocked, it can be prohibited, it can be undeveloped, all these different things that can cause that. But if you have this sort of structure, this internal structure, which if you want to be super physical, you can go in the DNA and different things like that and say like a human person by their natural kind of who they are has these things intrinsically and they can't be something else. Like you look at everything, like a human person can't go breed with a giraffe. It's impossible. You have these sort of intrinsic properties that lead you to have certain capacities. And so we just say human nature, rational animal, that's fine. Now, when we try to explain it and show what it looks like, we can show you that those are just natural capacities that a human person has. And then you have certain ends and goals as a human person that other things wouldn't have. You have a goal as a human person to work and to bear children and to rear them and do these things that an ant may not have the same properties or end goals as you have. So we try to build in that teleological element, just the endedness of things, because that helps you make sense of these different moral claims, particularly as it relates to some of the other topics we cover in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing, that's distinctly Christian, to bring in here is in which you guys dedicate a chapter to the Imago Dei, right? The image of God. And for looking at Genesis 1, 26 through 28, other places that we see this. There's different ways that people understand what's meant by image and likeness in Scripture, but it does make humanity unique, right? And so just why is this important for, especially in the context of moral apologetics, to talk about the image of God? And we can get into some implications here in a little bit, but just kind of generally speaking, why is this important for defending, the human person, biblically thinking in those categories?
Well, I think the image of God is important for a number of reasons. One of them is because it is sort of a level playing field of grounding that all humans share this particular characteristic. There's no group or particular subgroup that maybe somehow misses out on the image of God. They all have the image of God. And if you have the image of the Creator, that seems like a really important distinction that would cause you to say, how do we interact with these sort of creatures, in this case, us? The other reason it's important is because it gives you additional divine revelation into what actually the human nature is that's unique in comparison to these other natural kinds. When you go to the creation account, Genesis 1, God creates all these different things according to their kinds. You see that terminology over and over, according to their kinds, the birds according to their kind, everything that creeps on the ground according to their kind, and then you have the humans according to their kind. So there is a particular kind. That's what when we talk about human nature, it's just a kind that we are and that we have and that we possess and that we all possess. So the image of God is important because it shows this universal, we all possess this particular thing, and that can help us understand what we are as humans and what our goals are as humans.
Yeah.
It can show us like what our sort of rights are as humans. It grounds a lot of these things. Now, you can ground some of the similar things in natural arguments as well. But divine revelation gives you sort of like the cheat code to some of it.
Yeah,
Gives you this additional information to help you make sense of it much more quickly, much more robustly than would just a pure rational account of trying to deliberate why humans are different than others. And go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it just reminded me, when you said that, there you can get into some, deeper philosophical, things here, but I love the simplicity of just looking at the biblical context. Someone reading the scriptures can see that this is unique to humanity, right? And as kind of Wellham and Gentry point out in Kingdom Through Covenant, you have these concepts of obedient sonship and a servant kingship. And what does that mean? Well, I mean, it looks like reflecting the character of God to His creation, right? And it looks like worshiping the one who made you. Kind of these essential, and we could talk about, as you said, it can be, we can say more there, but I think someone just kind of picking up the scriptures can realize like, oh, well, this is how I relate to God and to humans. It's how I can love God and love my neighbor in that innate capacity that certainly fractured by the fall, but not totally annihilated in human beings, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned, the image of God. It's a little bit debated in contemporary literature and even in older literature. Like, what exactly is the core element of the image of God? And we try to make the argument that it's the essential core element is the structural capacity that we have, this sort of rational soul that makes us human. Now, there's a lot of other arguments to say, well, the core element is this relational capacity that humans have, where we have this ability to sort of relate to each other and love one another and do these different things that others don't have. Others want to say it's this functional element of acting in these obedient, righteous ways. And we just want to say, like, all those are elements of the image of God, but they all flow from the capacities. If you take away the capacity, you can't fulfill any of these other ways of living. And so we try to just cash out and say, like, look, you can't cut off this piece. And a lot of the reasons people want to cut it off is just because I think they misunderstand what it's actually claiming. And if they understood it, they'd say, oh, yeah, these all kind of like fit together. And that's sort of just the foundational element. It's necessary to do all these other things, but we have to have the structural element in place.
Yeah, that's right. No, I think that's great. In the book, you guys walk through several of the most pressing questions, kind of given what you talk about, human nature, image of God, the need for moral apologetics, setting kind of the framework, and then help us think through how that applies to certain issues. And so I want people to, read the book, but maybe we could give them a taste of a couple of things here, kind of work through the framework and, just show that it yields the Christian philosophical framework and worldview, that it yields the most consistent and I think coherent ethical responses to a lot of the contemporary objections to the Christian faith that we see today. And so maybe, one of them would be, how does the framework that you all provide help us think more deeply and helpfully about the personhood of, say, the unborn, or, the elderly? And we could say like embryo to elderly, right? And just the sanctity of human life.
Yeah. So like you said, the last half of the book is largely just sort of applying the framework that we've developed in the front half of the book. And I really do hope, and I think this book is actually really useful for local churches. I mean, how many pages is this? 100. I mean, it shows 200 pages, but it's a 200 easy pages.
The print's bigger. The pages are smaller.
There's lots of space. So it's very, in my mind, easily accessible for people and to be able to engage some of these topics. So the last half, we've got 5 different topics: race and racism, sex and gender, marriage and family, transhumanism, AI, and then the sort of the pro-life elements and abortion topics. And so when it comes to something like abortion, to me, it seems pretty cut and dry that you would realize this is at center an anthropological question, an issue. If someone denies that there is a human person prior to conception, then that drives the entire moral claim that they have for justifying abortion.
Yeah.
But if you can show that that is a human person at 8 weeks, at 10 weeks, at 12 weeks, then they have no real moral grounds to stand on. They're all about denying that they have any sort of personhood prior to conception. Now, even on a materialist framework where the person is entirely and completely made up of physical things, I still don't understand how you can deny personhood prior to conception, because there's nothing magical that happens from in utero to suddenly being outside of it that they gain this new physical piece that somehow makes them a human person. So even on that grounds, there's no moral ground for abortion on that. Now, we argue in the book that taking a substance dualist route can actually hinder a little bit your defense of why the human person is there prior to conception. Because we say, well, look, some people could argue, in theory, that because you are identical to your soul, maybe the soul isn't given until conception. Now, that's entirely ad hoc, obviously.
Sure.
But if you read even, older medieval literature, they were debating, when does the soul get there? Is it at 12 weeks? Is it 15 weeks? Is it right there at conception? When does the soul get there? But that's a legitimate, like, if you could say, hey, the soul doesn't actually come into play until they're out of the womb.
Yeah.
Then you have the moral grounds to say there is nothing wrong with destroying this fetus inside the womb because they're not a human person, because they don't have a soul.
Yeah.
And so we want to say, like, now, obviously, you could just say, well, the soul comes at conception, case closed, there's no issue here. But if somebody did make that argument, the soul doesn't come into play until whenever that is, then they do have moral grounds to say, well, I'm just getting rid of foreign material inside of this person's body. Now, I don't think you can justify that other than just completely ad hoc material for other reasons that are nefarious. But you can, in theory, could make that argument. So that's why we're like, hey, hylomorphous route makes a lot more sense, because like once you have the substantial form there with the material bits, like you've got a human person. So at conception, human person's there, and destroying the body means you're destroying the person. And so if you take out the person, then you are killing somebody. You're murdering a person. And if you murder a person, you're liable to judgment and all these different, like, we obviously don't murder. So to us, that just makes the sort of explanation and moral grounding of those arguments much easier and cleaner, because there's really no wiggle room once you go that route. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that's helpful. And I think, some of these issues, they're really difficult, to talk about. And I think sometimes part of moral apologetics, especially this seems more clear than other things, but I think a lot of times we don't help ourselves with the posture, that we take, especially when it's so plain to someone who has been given sight by the Holy Spirit, right? You have a new heart, new desires. You have the ability to see the beauty in these things and see the human person in a different light, to be able to see the human person in the way that God does. And so what would you say to someone to be like, okay, this is like, yes, you should have like good arguments, you should make them, and we need to not shy away from making these moral arguments, but maybe speak a little bit to the posture about what this would actually look like and the attitude that we should have.
Yeah, that's good. I think just from a general perspective, when it comes to apologetics, people need to drop the guns, drop the weapons, and adopt a posture of humility and kindness toward others. Now, there is a time for sort of strength in some of these elements, but by and large, I think people probably lean too much into the strength, especially just naturally, men are going to be stronger in these things. And men are often going to be the ones having these conversations, not exclusively, but their tendency typically is going to be too strong. And so my general advice is like, try to err on the side of kindness, because that's usually going to help you. Now, there's obviously some people who are just more given, have inclinations to be too kind, and say like, okay, you got to like actually make an argument here. So it just kind of depends on the person. But posture speaking, you got to have one of humility and kindness, because that's what's supposed to mark Christians.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to topics like this, where you have no idea, you could be talking to someone who's had an abortion, and you've got think through, like, how do I have this conversation in such a way that it is appropriately seasoned with the grace of Christ, but also with the truth of Christ? How do I convey
Yeah.
these elements properly? And so I typically, when it comes to something like this, want to unlink the conversation a little bit down the road and talk about human nature in particular. What is a human? When does a human become a human? When does a human stop being a human? And if we can get clear on those sort of things, it's going to be one of those self-evident things of, oh,
Yeah.
I'm going to make the connection. And if I don't make that connection, I made it, but I sinfully don't want to. And so I will try to block it out because of these other reasons. I'm afraid of the consequences. I whatever it is, they're going to, they see it. And then it's just a matter of the Holy Spirit making that, sort of pressing that upon them. And so you just pray and ask for the Lord's, convicting spirit to work in those in those ways. But I think if you can unlock it, you can reduce some of the temperature in the room. Because when you get really focused on talking about those topics, it can raise that temperature to a point where people become belligerent and unreasonable.
Yeah.
And if I can just talk about, well, what does it mean to be human? When do you become a human? It feels like the temperature just got lowered because now that conversation is farther in the abstract.
Yeah.
It feels that way. It's not. I mean, in some ways it is.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's a way of sort of leading people by the hand slowly and gently to the proper conclusion. And so I've always been a big fan of sort of like helping people get there with small steps, because that's going to, in my mind, lead a lot more people to the end goal than is saying, let's jump from stone to stone, and sorry if you get left behind.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, because one, like you said, it takes the temperature down, and there's a difference between being, bold and courageous and being brash, right? And so I think that sometimes we can be like, hey, is the sign somebody's holding up that says like abortion is murder correct? Like, well, yes. Like, is that a sin? Yes. But like you said, I think some people, like, they need the why, not just like, hey, this is wrong, And I think most good like parenting's the same way. It's not like, hey, it's not just like stop it, don't do that. It's like, hey, here's why, right? There's a discipleship, element to that, where we want to walk people through this and say, well, let's kind of take a few steps back, and say, just like we do with other things, right? When we say like, hey, you should, share the gospel with your neighbor. But then I don't equip you to actually take the steps to like get there, to go do it, confidently, to where it makes sense, or you have these growing desires to, view things the way that God does, and, do it accurately and correctly. I think being able to kind of take those steps and like let's remove ourselves from, maybe the heat for a little bit. Like, we're going to get there, and I'm going to tell you the truth, but I'm also going to do it in a way that I feel like you're going to be able to hear it better, hopefully, and to realize it's probably going to be more than one conversation, and it's probably going to be more than just something at the water cooler for 5 seconds, or at least it should be. And to be able to say like, hey, maybe this isn't the place to talk about it, but I would love to get lunch, grab some coffee, have you guys over, and like, let's think about that. That would be a really interesting, conversation. We have a little bit more time. Maybe if we take a kind of a step now, transition to something that, maybe has heat in like a different way, but it feels a little bit like the temperature's not quite as hot on this topic, even though it's something everybody's trying to answer and think through. And that would be how you guys address, AI, technology, transhumanism, all of these things in light of what a human person is. And I think this is even things that it's happening so fast that, even churches are having to think about, what's an appropriate use of, these things. Is it going to replace, certain staff because our workflows are better, and I think we can all say, it's like a lot of other things. It's not like, wholesale, like don't even touch it, but also like, it's not just totally adopt it. Like, it's not neutral, either. And it actually does really get to the question of, what is, how do we interact with this as, human beings, especially have all these, deep fake, type of things. And what it's doing for pornography industry and all of these other things. I mean, there are so many things to talk about here, but maybe to kind of just focus on helping people who are listening to this think about, like, well, you need to be asking, how this affects, the world that God created, and for us as human beings, the way He meant us to live. Like, how do we think biblically about artificial intelligence? Because that's not in my, it's not in the glossary, right, of my Bible. So,
yeah. So there are so many complicated questions that are coming our way with technology, with the advances that we have. And you touched on like 15 of them. And so the chapter doesn't anywhere have an exhaustive explanation for it. But what we do hope that it does is the framework and the way we answer certain of these questions can help you then answer all those other questions that come your way. So the chapter is really technology, broadly speaking, and two of the biggest pieces that we want to engage was transhumanism, which is a really largely growing field and a surprisingly dangerous field because it has questions of when is it okay to augment the human person? Do they ever stop becoming a human person? You have everything from small questions of, can we change this baby's eye color? To can we provide them super intelligence? Is that appropriate at before they're born to like inject something in there to change them? Is it appropriate to use advanced technologies to prevent diseases? Like, where is our sort of moral line? And there's a surprising amount of really important moral questions that people aren't engaging and thinking about. And if you go read the transhumanism books out there, you're like, wow, this is like legitimately a crazy novel. Like, I don't know, Lewis's abolition, like what's the hideous strength and all these things. People go like, it's out playing out right now. And then you obviously have these questions of artificial intelligence. What does that mean for us, for me? Should we allow it? Should we not allow it? Should it be allowed in universities? Should it be allowed in churches? I mean, should it be allowed in Logos? Like, how do we engage these questions? And so we try to engage them and say, look, we have a human nature, because on transhumanism sort of proposal, there's a level in which they say there's no such thing as human nature, so we can do whatever we want. We can become a machine. And I say, well, number one, I don't think that's actually possible. I think you would kill the subject before you would transform them in a machine. And number two, there are sort of principles of what it means to be a human and how we should treat humans that would either allow or disallow sort of things. A common way of saying is it's okay to do things that will help repair errors, but to exceed and go beyond sort of natural capacities is problematic. Not in the sense of I can go work out and become a better athlete.
Sure.
It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like taking foreign sort of substances or injections that would artificially inflate who you are or what you're doing. When it comes to like artificial intelligence, a lot of it we're going to boil down to just what does it mean to be a human person? What are the ends of human persons? One of the end of human persons is sort of this rational deliberation and creativity. And so if we ultimately rely on AI for everything, you are completely outsourcing a responsibility of what it means to be human. And if you understand that that sort of core competency is only possible for those substances who have that rational nature of a soul, then you would say like artificial intelligence will never achieve true intelligence because it lacks an actual soul. It lacks the human nature that's a requisite, a necessary piece for being able to have true intelligence of that sort. So that should stop your fear of AI taking over everything, but it shouldn't solve all your questions of like, how much can I use this? Now, I think artificial intelligence is really nice for some things. It's really bad for other things. And it's a really gray area for a lot of stuff. So, I mean, artificial intelligence at a rudimentary level, people have been using that for decades. That's like Excel formulas that you would plug in there that would just, you drop it all the way down to the bottom of your sheet. Like in a rudimentary way, that is a form of artificial intelligence. The large language models that we have now, where you can type in a question and it gives you an output, far more sophisticated. And it can still be useful in some ways. It can help you identify a problem in your code. I don't think that's problematic to have a tool that can go in there and identify, oh, you've got a slash here instead of a dash or whatever that may be that's causing an error in your stuff. Now, if you're completely outsourcing your vocation, your end as a human person to these things, if you are outsourcing your parenting to AI, how do I parent my child? How do I do all these other things? I think that's deeply problematic. And you are abdicating part of the responsibilities of who you are as a human person in this world. And so you're going to ultimately, I think, have significant negative consequences from going that route. It's not like it's going to just be a roadblock where you suddenly can't do it. You can do it and do all sorts of bad things. But your life is going to be impacted negatively from doing that. Now, that doesn't mean somebody doesn't somehow escape this, but we sort of argue that what human nature is, the ends of human nature, what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to act, you shouldn't be using AI for all these different essential activities of what it means to really live out the human life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And because I think I think one of the big temptations is, just the efficiency, piece. And so a lot of times, we forget that like it may make me more efficient in some things. And like you said, there's a lot of gray areas, but especially when it comes to, our spiritual formation and things that it's about the process, right?
Yeah,
it's about forming us into the image of Christ, and you can't that's not efficient, right? If God were totally about efficiency, then he would have just like zapped me and I'd be totally sanctified and living in glory, right? And so if I keep, cheating things, like, yes, can I use it for some things? Like, sure. But we always have to be thinking about, is this making me actually have to wrestle with things to grow as a person, to think, to work over these problems again? Or am I actually, rather than having that form me, I'm actually doling, like my emotions, my senses, my purpose, in life, and like, sure, I become efficient, but what's that actually look like if we're seeing, depression, anxiety, all of these things, rising because I may be able to accomplish a task faster, but I'm not actually enjoying life more.
Yeah, I mean, you crushed it there. So the efficiency, I mean, the idolatry of efficiency that we have in our modern age is ridiculous. And I succumb to it all the time, but there's a sense in which I remember reading a dissertation by my friend Philip Bunn, and one of he had this awesome quote from some guy, I don't know who it was, talking about how basically when we come in love with efficiency and machines, we replace our heart of flesh with the heart of a machine.
Yeah.
And I've never really forgotten that sort of phraseology of just like when we sort of outsource all these things to machines, we no longer have a real living beating heart. And it's absolutely right to point out the process is essential to growing in these various ways, to achieving various ends. Virtue, all these things are habits that are formed over time. And if you take out the process, you will never actually achieve the end that you are looking to get to. So you can't just short circuit the whole process and hope that you get there. You have to go through it. So I see guys all the time. This is a little bit of a niche conversation for the theology nerds. But the growing ability to take these untranslated sources and just click a button, AI translates it for you. Now you have access to all these sources. That's cool. And it's really powerful. But there's a real sense in which you are losing an essential element of the theological formation process of wrestling with sources on your own, engaging them on your own, struggling with translation, making mistakes, comparing things, having to go back again and again and again. When you can just control F all of your theology, you are going to lose so much of the essential formative element of actually becoming a theological master.
Yeah.
And so when you do that, at some point down the line, you eventually lose all control and ability to do anything, and you have to restart. It's like going back to the land of Israel when somehow the Bible or the Torah gets lost, right? Mm-hmm. It gets worse and worse and worse, and then there's this like critical moment of we have no moral concepts whatsoever anymore. I think that will happen in our day eventually. We will outsource more and more and more. People have no idea how to actually do theology anymore, and we'll have to crack back and actually get back. Let me get old school pen and paper out and read this book, with my own two hands. And the people who don't give up those things will then be able to have a significant advantage to help people, shepherd them, and to remind them that, guys, we can't outsource everything because you're going to lose a lot of the essential elements of what it means to be a pastor, a theologian, or whatever else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great place for us to land this conversation. But maybe just a final question for you would be, how do you see this book helping, pastors, Christian educators, and parents in particular? I think we talked about some things in the episode already, but if you could just summarize like a couple bullet points that for those people groups in particular.
Yeah, I think in one sense, a lot of what we cover in this should be generally intuitive common sense. A lot of people, I think they're going to read this and say, yeah. The goal is more just to give language and sort of frameworks to help people explain what they already believe, what they already know. And so we're just trying to help equip them from that standpoint. Here's some resources of examples, some data, some studies that have been done, and some sort of language to go around how to explain this to people and how to better shepherd them along these questions. So I don't know, there's maybe 2 pages on IVF. There's maybe 2 pages on different topics in here to help people sort of grapple with what's going on here in these really real conversations that people have and engage. Because you become a pastor, a lot of the stuff, you've learned a lot of really important things, but once you get your boots on the ground, you're like, oh man, I didn't think about that question.
Yeah.
How do I connect this to this particular piece? And so one of our chapters on sex and gender, I hope that's a useful chapter because it gives sort of a summary of how people in the world are explaining these concepts.
Yeah.
And so you have this intuitive, this is what's true and right, but you may not know how other people are talking. And if you can't sort of translate that language of how people are thinking and talking, it's difficult to make that connection to say, here's the issue. Let me show you why this is problematic. So we're just trying to give people language to help solve and explain different problems that they're engaging on their regular lives and in the regular church ministries. And hopefully that's what it's going to be. It's not like this robust academic treatment that's breaking all this new ground. No, it's not trying to do that. It's trying to give you this summary and this framework and language to engage all the problems that you have already.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I really hope that listeners will pick it up and give it a read. And so thanks for your work in this. I'll drop the book, Moral Apologetics, in the show notes. So Jordan, thanks for joining me for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man.